Welcome to Enabling Ethical Open Access Impact Analytics through Multi-stakeholder Data Governance Frameworks, Stewardship, Policy, and Community. Submission number 84. In this session, 3 global data intermediaries for scholarly output usage data will share their approaches to multilateral data stewardship, organizational governance, and stakeholder engagement. In this session, you will hear from myself, Christina Drummond, Program Officer for the Open Access Ebook Usage Data Trust, Dimitris, Pierrakos, the Product Manager for the Open Air Usage Count Service, and Joe Lambert, Head of Licensing Intelligence and Analytics at JISC, which hosts the Institutional Repository Usage Statistics Service. We will discuss the lessons we've learned while operationalizing international data governance and stewardship for data pertaining to open access policy and investment. Representing the youngest of our 3 efforts, I will begin by speaking to you about the Open Access eBook Usage Data Trust, which began as a conversation in 2015 and has since grown through the support of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation into a global effort spanning 5 continents. Over the past 2 years, our effort has been engaging the global open access ebook publishing ecosystem to document usage data supply chain, understand the uses of that data, and plan for elements of a usage data trust's governance and sustainability. For those unfamiliar with the world of book usage statistics for open access impact metrics, our work focuses on facilitating the understanding of knowledge transfer and use. Authors, their institutions, and their publishers need to report out aggregated ebook impacted usage data to report and show alignment not only with funder priorities, but to show how successful outreach has been to target audiences. In addition, publishers are looking at strategy-driven analytics that can use this data to inform operations from marketing, printing, and distribution strategies. Libraries also want to understand how books are being accessed online, not only in terms of where and how much, but to really get a sense of context, to make the best use of their often public resources for collection development and to support open access. Yet, the data to establish open access book impact is sourced from a complex supply chain, from end-user interfaces and library management systems to ebook repository and dissemination platforms. Challenges arise as publishers, libraries, and their service providers attempt to aggregate and benchmark usage data from across the supply chain to tell the story of a single book. While publishing stakeholders and policymakers want to leverage that data, those providing reporting must have the time and expertise necessary to curate, normalize, and generally wrangle their diverse flows of related usage data. In some cases, small organizations without the capacity to adopt standard best practices, such as Counter, provide their best attempts, or they look to Google Analytics as a substitute. As a data trust, we are exploring whether we can address these capacity-based issues through economies of scale and community norms that are governed through a common data steward. To develop a diverse global data trust, however, we knew we had to work across a number of diverse stakeholders to define data stewardship principles for ethical data use. Perspectives would span those generating data about ebook assets and use to those who need to leverage such data. Plus, we had to engage those who could potentially be impacted by any usage data analytics to ensure ethical use and to prevent unintended harm to those data subjects. From the start, our team recognized the competitive dynamics are involved, not only among authors seeking funder and partnerships, but among publishers who are looking to sign those authors for those open access publications, and also among the platforms and services that are providing value-added service to those publishers and libraries. Which is why, for us, the building and maintenance of trust became core to our data stewardship and governance strategy. As we aim to build a sustainable, interoperable solution, we're developing mechanisms to instill trust across our diverse stakeholders. This is not easy as we are working in an environment where proprietary algorithms are used to develop impact metric scores, and many are advocating for usage statistics to be made available as open data. Transparency and data provenance issues have eroded trust among players, and it's within this environment that we've been building towards a data trust to support the aggregation of both open and controlled data sets from both public and private partners. Within our current research project, we kept a racing model in mind. However, we had to intentionally go beyond a typical research project team and advisory board structure, early to allow for open engagement by interested parties who may not have signed on at the beginning of our current grant. We accomplish this by setting up focused working group lists that could be tapped for specific questions in peer-based communities of practice, where input can be sought from representatives of a specific stakeholder type, in our case such as libraries or presses. This structure has allowed us so far to mitigate cross-cultural communications challenges while bridging silos and sectors. Members of our advisory board and project team are now working to outline core governance principles, a mission, vision, and the impact-based services model that we can take back to these broader communities as we prepare to enter the next phase of our effort. In fact, we're about to launch an RFP process here in the next few weeks to select a partner organization to act as an organizational host for the Data Trust Secretariat, which will formalize bylaws and the data sharing rules in 2022. This formalization of governance structures became a needed step for us prior to establishing the data stewardship rules of the road for data governance, because we wanted to make sure that community interests were formalized, recognized, and driving those decisions. To close, I'll note that there are a handful of excellent resources that have guided our work in governance development so far. From the Open Data Institute's reports on how to design trustworthy and sustainable data institutions to New York University's GovLab and their data collaboratives, a project, and Data Stewards Academy, which I participate, and the Sage BioNetwork's mechanisms to govern responsible sharing of open data. All of these resources have been fantastic, and I would note that in addition, the International Data Spaces Association, and specifically their design principles for data spaces, has provided a path forward and really highlighted the building blocks and tools that we need to accomplish and put together as we move forward. Which, compiling all these lessons, they've really provided resources for us to act as fast followers. To be able to adapt and leverage these resources has allowed our team to really focus on how we do this for scholarly communications, impact reporting, and analytics. In closing, I want to highlight 4 core observations from our governance work to date. The first being that we have to lead early with community building and engagement to position our stakeholders to derive those developments in that governance we're making. And by starting that partner engagement early, we really keep in mind that idea that who is involved at the onset shapes how that data trust is perceived. Next, I just wanted to note that there's a large distinction in terms of a knowledge base around what it means to have a data trust versus a data repository or a data lake, or even data lakehouses at this point. And so it's important for us to remember there's a public education access. Beyond that, I will note that volunteer capacity really is limited, and we have to be mindful, we've learned, of what we can expect in terms of not only meeting attendance, but what we ask of our volunteers in terms of how much email we send, what those communication strategies look like, and what asynchronous activities really look like in terms of time commitments. And finally, I'll just note that there is a real sustainability challenge presented as these sustainability models are developing for open infrastructure and really for data altruism organizations like a data trust. We have to think about how do we create these systems so that they can be inclusive and diverse and engage organizations that have varying levels of resource capacity. It remains an open question for how our society is going to sustain these mechanisms, especially if we want to make sure that everyone can participate. So with that, thank you very much for joining.
So hi and welcome to Data for Policy 2021 conference. My name is Dimitris Pierrakos and I work as a research associate in Athena Research Center and OpenRamke. I'm the developer and product management of the OpenAir User Count service, which is the user statistics service provided by OpenAir. This presentation is a part of our submission with Christina Drummond and Lambert, and I will briefly discuss the OpenAir User Count service and approach and the policy the service employs for data governance and stewardship. A few notes about OpenAir. OpenAir is a European project funded by the European Commission since 2008. It has led the shift to open scholarship in Europe and help alignment with the rest of the world. Actually, OpenAir bridges the worlds where science occurs and science is published. So in one hand, OpenAir is a community-driven organization which accomplishes a participatory infrastructure via its established network of national open access desks called NOADs from EU member states and associate members. And on the other hand, is accompanied by a service-driven approach which aims to support, accelerate, and monitor open science. The main structure of OpenAir information is the OpenAir graph, which is comprised of interlinked scientific products with access rights information, linked to funding information, and information about research communities. OpenAir graph provides a model for the representation of information, and it uses it to represent. It is used to represent objects, which are also called research products, for example, publications, data sets, etc., in the scholarly communication domain, and also represents the relations that exist among them. So where this, in this infrastructure, the usage count service is located, the usage count service is one of the pillar services of OpenAir and simply counts the usage of the OpenAir research graph entities. In other words, it counts the exploitation of the research products inside the usage, the OpenAir graph. So how this is realized, OpenAir usage count service collects anonymized usage data or consolidated user statistic reports from the distributed network of repositories using open standards and protocols. It generates reliable, consolidated, and comparable usage metrics, such as the number of downloads of objects and metadata views, which are relative to scientific articles with persistent identifiers across content providers. A usage count service offers trusted metrics for all aspects of research results, and most important, is compatible with the counter code of practice, which is proposed by IRIS UK and JISC. The usage count service allows the sharing of statistics across the distributed network of content providers and provides significant added value for different stakeholders like authors, institutional open science platforms, funders, and etc. So these stakeholders can find answers like which funder has the biggest engagement in Europe, or provide me the evolution of popularity of the publication or data of a project within the last 5 years. So for stakeholders on the content provider level, it can serve repository managers and hosting institutions as a tool to evaluate the success of the publication platform. And on the individual item level, it can demonstrate popular publications to authors and readers. Keep in mind that in addition to other traditional, for example, citation counts and alternative metrics, for example, mentions in social media, recommendations, etc., it can inform funding authorities in research evaluation processes. Moreover, on the research product level, user statistics can indicate relevance of a particular research output, of topics, of disciplinary data sources over the course of time and up to the present, and therefore they can be seen as an important indicator to analyze trends. Also for non-traditional output types, for example, books or research data, user statistics are often the only indicator available, while the implementation of data citation standards lags behind. Finally, OpenAir usage count service not only facilitates the above services, but also allows the aggregation of usage information about research products, which are published in several places. OpenAir user count service supports the required data stewardship functionality, for example, accessibility, information integrity, preservability, sustainability, etc., to achieve a well-governed usage data model, and this process leads to realize the concept of fairness in usage data. So, since fairness is a prerequisite for proper data management and data stewardship, OpenAir usage count service offers user statistics that are findable, they are discoverable with identifiable and locatable by means of a standard identification mechanism like persistent identifiers or content provider IDs, etc. They are accessible, they are always available and obtainable, they are interoperable. Data exchange and reuse between research institution, organizations, and countries is performed by a counter code of practice standards. And finally, they are reusable since they are sufficiently described and shared with a least restrictive license. So thanks for joining, and I will be happy to answer your questions either during the live session of the conference or via email.
Hi, I'm Jo Lambert, and I'm going to end our joint session by speaking about experiences from an IRIS perspective. So IRIS stands for Institutional Repository Usage Statistics, and it's one of JISC's analytics services that enables the sharing of information about institutional repository downloads, and it uses the counter standard as its basis. So essentially, raw download data is transmitted from repositories via a tracker protocol, which is implemented at the repository end, which enables us to then process the raw data we receive into counter-conformance statistics by following rules defined in the Counter Code of Practice, which is a standard for measuring usage of online resources in a standardised way. And because this is a documented standard, it means that it's transparent and it's replicable, and the data within IRIS are standardised and comparable across different repository platforms over time, and also with stats provided by scholarly publishers. And the approach provides certain economies of scale, with JISC creating and presenting stats on behalf of the user community. So it alleviates some of the usage data challenges that Christina spoke of earlier around the burden of data wrangling, data veracity, standards adoption. And initially, IRIS was developed as a service to JISC members. It's used by more than 80% of higher education institutions in the UK, but it's being used by others outside of this group. And so primarily, IRIS is used by repository and research managers or administrators who are maybe monitoring engagement, reporting on usage, using data to promote the repository or to indicate highly used content, and maybe to assess the impact of any advocacy work. The service really helps to indicate how usage of repository compares against similar institutions, whether that's on a national basis or internationally. Researchers can interact with IRIS directly to review the performance of their research outputs, and where they're moving between institutions, they can obviously track usage of publications across universities, knowing that those stats are comparable. And where there is a sufficient aggregation of data, such as that we have in the UK for UK repositories, then there are opportunities for funders and strategists to use that data to monitor transition to open access, for instance, or to inform policy. We've also got service providers such as the Content Aggregator Core and OAPEN that are using IRIS in order to provide standardised statistics to their customers. And we're working with OpenAir, who you saw the presentation earlier, and essentially we're acting as a single point of contact for the transfer of usage data on behalf of UK repositories. So there are real efficiencies there. The principles underpinning IRIS are standards-based approaches, a user-focused, community-driven approach to development, and a focus on sustainability. So both in relation to the IRIS stakeholder community, the product itself and the data, and then the counter standard that underpins that. So in terms of organisational governance, then JISC is a membership organisation with a board of trustees that oversee strategy, finance and performance. And filtering down across the organisation, there are a number of strategic and operational advisory groups that are informing development of JISC products and services, whether that's at a directorate, a portfolio or a product level. From an IRIS perspective, then IRIS users are consulted on developments and they're engaged through aspects such as a product focused mailing list, and we've also got a community advisory group who are advising on development priorities. In terms of data stewardship, JISC is providing an oversight role. So participating repositories and repository vendors implement the tracker protocol, which enables the transmission of raw download data. And the tracker protocol is something that's intended to be easy to implement and offer a low barrier to entry. JISC then processes the data that's received and creates counter statistics according to the standard, and then essentially surfaces those data through the portal and via an API. And a view of that aggregated data set means that we're in a good position to spot anomalies. And with multiple pairs of eyes viewing the data, potentially identifying errors, this leads to improved data quality. And finally, members of the team sit on the Counter Board and the Executive Committee. So we're in a position to support development of standards based on an understanding of user requirements and knowledge of the data in practice. In terms of stakeholders, we're aiming to make the best use of limited resources and to engage organisations of different shapes and sizes with varying technical or resource capabilities. We're engaging with Counter to support standards development, with product vendors to support adherence to standards and uptake of those standards. And we're also engaging with related initiatives such as those that Christina and Dimitris represent, so that we can make sure that we're aligned and that we really optimise valuable people time. So these themes and lessons learned run through each of the three presentations. So standards and protocols are really supporting transparency, enabling processes to be understood and replicated. They help to improve data quality, supporting consistency and comparison. They enable interoperability, supporting automation and scalability. We think that keeping things simple is key, making sure that there's a low barrier to entry, avoiding over-engineered and time-consuming solutions really helps to embed and encourage uptake and use. Examples that I've mentioned, such as the Iris Tracker protocol, are technology neutral and they're relatively quick and simple to implement. So hopefully encourage broader uptake and use. Collaboration is really key to developing a consensus, defining shared approaches, developing standards and supporting their adoption. Organisations like Counter have been really successful in engaging a broad range of stakeholders over many years, and this means that the standard continues to develop and remains relevant. The initiatives that Christina, Dimitris and I have introduced are all working together to a certain extent really to share knowledge and to avoid reinventing the wheel. And broad partnerships that are inclusive of different voices, that recognise different resource constraints and build trust are obviously really crucial. At the same time, it's really important to recognise capacity limitations and the dangers of burnout, as Christina alluded to. So we need a mixture of flexibility and pragmatism to continue to adapt to evolving needs in a transitioning open access landscape. But as Christina noted, there are sustainability challenges when community-based infrastructure is unfunded and competing with the same data providers for resources. So you've heard three projects and organisations outline approaches to some of the challenges around data usage, governance, stewardship and engagement, but we'd really value your perspectives on these points, and we look forward to continuing this discussion during the conference. So thanks for listening.